the scent of rain and antiseptic. That's the first thing I remember from the day my world cracked in half. For 3 years, our marriage had been a slow, quiet decay, like an old house giving in to rot. The laughter had faded first, replaced by a tense silence that filled the spaces between us at the dinner table. Then the affection vanished, his touch becoming a memory I could barely conjure. The man I married, the vibrant, quick-to-laugh Ben, had been replaced by a stranger who looked at me with a tired indifference that was worse than anger. He'd been sleeping in the guest room for 6 months. We were roommates sharing a mortgage, two ghosts haunting the beautiful craftsman home we'd once filled with so much life. The call came on a Tuesday, a slick, wet Portland morning where the sky was the color of a bruise. A clipped professional voice on the other end of the line. A Sergeant Miller. There's been an accident. A head-on collision on the I-5 bridge. Your husband, Benjamin Hale, is at OHSU Hospital. He's stable, but... The pause that followed was a chasm. I drove, my hands numb on the steering wheel, the windshield wipers swishing a frantic, useless rhythm against the downpour. I expected to feel panic, a wave of gut-wrenching fear. Instead, I felt a strange, hollow calm. I was rushing to the side of a man who, just that morning, had walked past me without a word, grabbing his keys and briefcase as if I were just another piece of furniture. In the sterile, white-walled waiting room, a doctor with exhaustion etched around her eyes finally found me. "Mrs. Hale, I'm Dr. Anya Sharma." She led me to a small private consultation room. "Ben is lucky. He has a concussion, a broken clavicle, and some severe bruising, but he's going to recover." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "But," she added, her expression softening with a practiced empathy, "the impact caused some trauma to the brain. He's experiencing retrograde amnesia. He seems to have lost his memory of the last few years." My mind snagged on the words. Lost the last few years. The years of silence, the guest room, the fights that ended with him slamming a door and me crying quietly in the kitchen. The slow, painful erosion of our love. All of it. Gone? When I finally walked into his room, he was awake, a bandage wrapped around his head, his arm in a sling. He turned his head slowly, and his eyes, the same deep blue eyes that had grown so cold, were wide with a bewildered, heart-stopping warmth. "Clara?" he whispered, and his voice was the voice I hadn't heard in years. It was the voice of the man who'd proposed to me under the cherry blossoms in the Japanese garden. "Clara, thank God. I was so scared. I couldn't remember anything." He reached for my hand with his good one, his grip weak but desperate. "Don't leave me." I sank into the chair beside his bed, my own hand closing around his. Tears I didn't know I had in me began to fall. The cold, distant stranger was gone. And in his place, looking at me like I was his entire world, was the only man I had ever truly loved. Bringing Ben home from the hospital felt like stepping back in time. The house, which had become a silent battleground of resentment and unspoken endings, suddenly felt like a sanctuary again. As I helped him out of the car, his good arm wrapped carefully around my shoulders, he stopped on the porch and just stared. "Wow," he murmured, his gaze sweeping over the climbing roses I'd planted, the wind chimes I'd hung, the welcome mat that read, "Home, Sweet Home." "Did we do all this?" His voice was filled with a genuine wonder that twisted my heart. For the past year, he hadn't noticed the garden, hadn't complimented a single thing I'd done to make our house a home. Now he was seeing it all for the first time, again. Inside, he walked through the room slowly, touching things with a tentative reverence. He ran his hand over the worn velvet of our armchair, picked up a framed photo of us from our honeymoon in Italy, and smiled. It was a real smile, the kind that reached his eyes, crinkling the corners in that way I'd missed so much it ached. "I don't remember this trip," he said softly, tracing my face in the picture. "But I remember how I felt. Happy." He looked at me, his expression open and vulnerable. "I'm sorry, Clara. I feel like such a burden. I can't even remember our life." I shook my head, my throat tight. "You're not a burden, Ben. You just need to heal." I set him up in our bedroom, in the queen-sized bed he hadn't slept in for half a year. He didn't question it. To him, this was his room, our room. The guest room down the hall was just that, a place for guests. I unpacked his hospital bag, putting his things away while he sat on the edge of the bed, watching me with an intensity that was both unnerving and deeply comforting. The cold, dismissive man, who treated me like an inconvenience, was gone. This man watched my every move as if he was memorizing me, terrified I might disappear. That night, I helped him change into his pajamas and eased him under the covers. Will you stay? He asked, his voice small, almost boyish. I don't want to be alone. I hesitated for only a second before sliding in beside him, keeping a careful distance. But he shifted closer, his warmth seeping through the blankets. He fell asleep holding my hand, his breathing slow and even. I lay awake for hours, staring at the familiar shadows on the ceiling, listening to the sound of my husband sleeping peacefully beside me. A dangerous, fragile hope began to bloom in the barren landscape of my heart. Maybe this was it. Maybe the universe had given us a reset button, a second chance to get it right, to find our way back to the people in that photograph. I was falling back into the role of the loving, doting wife. But it wasn't a role anymore. It was real. I was caring for the Ben I missed, and I told myself, foolishly, that the other one was gone for good. The weeks that followed were a fragile, sun-drenched dream. Ben's clavicle was healing, and with each physical therapy session, he grew stronger. But his memory remained a stubborn blank slate from the last 3 years. He remembered our wedding, our first apartment, the day we adopted our golden retriever, Gus. But the promotion that had consumed him, the late nights, the arguments that felt like sandpaper on my soul, all of it was a void. He was relentlessly cheerful, endlessly affectionate. He relearned how to cook my favorite meals, asking me to guide him through the recipes with a patient smile. He'd bring me coffee in bed, just like he used to. We started talking again, really talking, about books and music, and silly things we saw on our slow walks around the neighborhood. It felt like we were dating all over again, rediscovering each other. I was so caught up in this beautiful, impossible second chance that I almost let myself believe it was real. The first crack in my carefully constructed new reality appeared on a Saturday morning. The mail came, and with it, a stack of get-well cards from his firm. I sat at the kitchen table, opening them for him, reading the cheerful, generic messages aloud. Then I came to one with a sleek, minimalist design. The envelope was a heavy cardstock, addressed in a flowing, elegant script. Hope you're back on your feet soon, B. The office isn't the same without you. All the best, Lena. The name was a punch to the gut. Lena. Lena Price, the senior designer his firm had hired 2 years ago. The woman he'd started having working lunches with. The woman whose name, when I'd found it in a late-night text on his phone, had been the catalyst for our biggest, most devastating fight. He'd sworn she was just a friend, a colleague. He'd accused me of being jealous, paranoid, crazy. The fight ended with him packing a bag and moving into the guest room, shouting that he couldn't live with my suffocating insecurity. Now, holding her card, my hand trembled. Ben looked over from the couch, where he was trying to work a crossword puzzle. "Who's that one from?" he asked casually. I swallowed, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Oh, just a colleague," I said, my voice sounding impossibly normal. "Lena, you probably don't remember her." He frowned slightly. "Lena? No, doesn't ring a bell." He shrugged and went back to his puzzle, dismissing her name as easily as he'd dismissed my fears all those months ago. I quickly slid the card to the bottom of the pile, my fingers feeling like they'd been burned. The unease was back, a cold serpent coiling in my stomach. I wanted to believe this new Ben, this kind, loving man, would never have lied to me. But her name was a stark, jarring reminder of the life he'd forgotten, a life I was desperately trying to erase. I pushed the feeling down, burying it under the weight of my hope. He was different now. That was all that mattered. Ben's recovery was slow but steady. He was still confined to the house for the most part, his energy waning quickly. His home office, the one he'd started locking the door to 6 months before the accident, had become a cluttered repository of his old life. Blueprints were unrolled on the floor, files were stacked precariously on his desk, and the air was thick with the stale scent of stress and stale coffee. "I should probably clean this up," I said one afternoon, standing in the doorway. "Make it less chaotic for when you're ready to work from home." Ben, resting on the living room couch, just nodded. "Sure, whatever you think is best. I can't even look at it right now. Feels like a stranger's room." It felt like a stranger's room to me, too. For months, this space had been his fortress, a place I was not welcome. Now, armed with a trash bag and a duster, I felt like an archaeologist excavating a lost civilization. I started with the stacks of paper on his desk, sorting them into piles: bills, contracts, old project notes. It was tedious, emotionless work. Then I moved to the drawers. The top one was filled with pens, paper clips, and old USB drives. The second held technical manuals and software disks. But the bottom drawer, the deep one at the back, was stuck. I jiggled the handle, but it wouldn't budge. It was locked. I remembered the tiny key he used to keep on his keychain, the one he'd told me was for his private file cabinet at work. A cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. On a whim, I went to the small ceramic bowl by the front door where we dropped our keys. His keychain was still there, untouched since the day of the accident. And there it was, a small silver key. My hand was shaking as I returned to the office and slid the key into the lock. It turned with a soft, sickening click. I pulled the drawer open. It wasn't filled with files. Inside, nestled beneath a stack of bland financial reports, was a small black leather-bound journal. I recognized it instantly. I had given it to him for our 5th anniversary, his initials embossed in silver on the cover. He'd used it for a year, then it had disappeared. I'd assumed he'd lost it or filled it up. I knew I shouldn't. Every instinct screamed at me to close the drawer, lock it, and walk away, to preserve this fragile piece we'd found. But the memory of Lena's name on that card, of his locked door, of the years of distance, it was a poison I had to draw out. With trembling fingers, I lifted the journal and opened it to the first page. His familiar, angular handwriting filled the lines, and as I began to read, the carefully constructed walls of my new reality began to crumble. I sat on the floor of his office, the leather-bound journal open in my lap, the world outside his window fading to an indistinct blur. The early entries were familiar, echoes of a happier time. He wrote about a project he was excited about, a funny thing our dog Gus did, a weekend trip to the coast we had taken. But as I flipped through the pages, the tone began to shift. The entries grew shorter, more sporadic, and a new name started to appear: Lena. At first, it was innocent. Lena Price joined the team today. She's sharp, really impressive. A few weeks later, had lunch with Lena. It's refreshing to talk to someone who actually gets the pressure I'm under. Then, the entries became more personal, more charged. Clara doesn't understand. She thinks I'm just working late. She doesn't see how draining it is. Lena sees it. I'm just working late. She listens. My breath hitched. He was painting me as the nagging, unsupportive wife, while casting this other woman as his confidant, his savior. My hands were ice cold as I turned the pages faster, the words blurring into a narrative of our marriage's death, written in his own hand. He wrote about our fights, twisting my pleas for connection into accusations of neediness. He wrote about feeling trapped, suffocated. I feel like I'm performing a role, the good husband. With Lena, I can just be myself. The entries about her grew more passionate, more detailed. Stolen lunches that stretched for hours, late-night texts filled with deep connection. He described the way she laughed, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about architecture. He wrote about her with a raw, desperate love that he hadn't shown me in years. It was a brutal, intimate look into the heart of the man who had been sleeping in the guest room, a man who had already left me long before his body did. Then I found it. The last entry, dated Monday, October 12th, the night before the accident. My vision swam, and I had to grip the journal to steady my hands. The ink was dark, decisive, the letters sharp as shards of glass. It's done. I told Lena I'm leaving Clara tomorrow morning. I can't do this anymore. Live this lie. I packed a bag. It's in the trunk of my car, ready to go. I'll tell Clara after she leaves for work. I'll leave the letter on the bed. Then I'm driving straight to Lena's. We're going to get a place together, start over. I can finally breathe. I'm finally free. The journal slipped from my fingers and fell to the floor with a soft thud. I stared at the wall, seeing nothing. The bag. In the trunk of his car. The car that was now a mangled wreck in an impound lot. He wasn't on his way to a client meeting. He was on his way to her. He was on his way to start a new life. The accident hadn't given us a second chance. It had only delayed his escape. The amnesia wasn't a reset button. It was a prison, keeping him tethered to a life he was about to abandon. And I, his loving, devoted wife, was his unwitting warden. I don't know how long I sat on the floor, surrounded by the ghost of my dead marriage. Eventually, the numbness receded, replaced by a grief so profound it felt like a physical weight in my chest. I wasn't just mourning the man he had become. I was mourning the man I thought he was becoming again. The kind smiles, the gentle touches, the shared laughter over breakfast, all of it was a lie. He wasn't in love with me. He was a man with a brain injury, clinging to the last clear memories he had, and I was the face in them. I was his anchor to a past he no longer remembered trying to escape. With mechanical movements, I picked up the journal, placed it back in the drawer, and locked it. I put the tiny silver key back on his keychain in the ceramic bowl by the door. I walked out of the office and closed the door behind me, sealing the truth inside. Ben was in the living room, a blanket over his lap, flipping through one of our old wedding albums. He looked up when I entered, his face breaking into that warm, open smile that now felt like a dagger in my heart. "Hey," he said, his voice soft. "Look at us." He patted the cushion next to him. "We were so young, so happy." I forced myself to walk over, to sit beside him, to look at the smiling strangers on the glossy pages. There we were, cutting the cake, sharing our first dance, our faces radiant with a naive, beautiful hope. The man beside me on the couch looked at the photo of the groom with a sense of wistful discovery. "He really loved you," Ben whispered, as if talking about someone else entirely. "I can see it in his eyes." My own eyes filled with tears, and he misinterpreted them immediately. Hey, what's wrong?" he asked, his brow furrowing with genuine concern. He reached out, his thumb gently wiping a tear from my cheek. His touch was electric, a shock of intimacy and deceit. "I'm just emotional," I managed to say, my voice thick. "It's been a long day." He accepted the lie without question, pulling me into a gentle hug. "I know," he murmured into my hair, "but we're going to be okay. I promise. I'm not going anywhere." I closed my eyes, breathing in the familiar scent of his sweater, and my heart shattered into a million pieces. He was promising to stay, not knowing he had already packed a bag to leave. Every kind word was a twist of the knife. Every loving gesture was a monument to a life that was already over. From that moment on, I became a performer. I smiled when he smiled. I laughed at his jokes. I held his hand. But inside, I was living in the locked room with his journal, trapped with a truth that was suffocating me. He was a stranger in my husband's body, and I was falling in love with a ghost while being haunted by the man he truly was. The charade was exhausting. Each day felt like walking a tightrope over a canyon, pretending the ground beneath me was solid. I lived in a state of hypervigilance, terrified of any slip-up, any mention of a name or a place from the past 3 years that might jog his memory. I became the curator of our shared history, carefully editing out the parts that would expose the lie. The strain began to wear on me. I lost weight. Dark circles formed under my eyes. I was quiet, my laughter forced, my smiles thin. And Ben, in his state of blissful ignorance, noticed. He became my caretaker, mirroring the devotion I was feigning for him. He'd make me tea, insist I rest, and look at me with eyes full of worry. One evening, we were sitting on the porch, watching the sun set behind the West Hills. The sky was a blaze of orange and pink, the kind of sunset we used to watch in comfortable silence. Now, the silence was a roaring in my ears. Is everything okay, Clara? He asked, his voice cutting through the quiet. He turned to face me, his expression serious. You seem sad, distant. Is it me? Am I too much to handle right now? His concern was so genuine, so pure. It was almost unbearable. He thought my sadness was about him, about his recovery, about the burden of his care. He had no idea I was mourning him, the him that he was now, because I knew he was temporary. No, Ben, it's not you, I said, my voice hollow even to my own ears. You've been amazing. I'm just tired. It's been a stressful few months. He reached for my hand, his fingers lacing through mine. I know. And I hate that I'm the cause of it. Sometimes I feel so guilty. You're stuck with this broken version of me, and you deserve so much more. The irony was a physical ache in my chest. He thought he was the broken one, when in reality, our marriage had been shattered long before his accident. He was the one who was about to walk away, to seek out so much more with someone else. I squeezed his hand, a lie and a truth all at once. You're not broken, Ben. You're healing. I couldn't tell him the truth. How could I? How do you look at the man who loves you, who depends on you completely, and say, by the way, you were about to leave me for another woman the day you crashed your car? It would be cruel. It would destroy the fragile progress he'd made. But living the lie was destroying me. I started thinking about Lena. Where was she? Did she know about the accident? Or did she just think Ben had stood her up, ghosted her on the very day he was supposed to start their new life together? Did she spend her nights wondering what happened, hating him for his cowardice? The thought was a strange, bitter comfort. In a twisted way, she and I were both victims of the same man, a man who no longer existed. I was trapped in a beautiful lie, and she was trapped in a painful truth. I had a choice to make, and it was tearing me apart. I could continue this performance, clinging to this version of Ben, hoping his memory never returned. Or I could face the truth, and in doing so, lose him all over again, this time forever. That night, I couldn't sleep. I slipped out of bed, leaving Ben in a peaceful, untroubled slumber, and went back to his office. The room was dark, the moonlight casting long shadows across the floor. I didn't need to turn on a light. I walked directly to the desk, unlocked the drawer, and pulled out the journal. My fingers found the last page, the paper soft and worn. I read the words again, letting them burn into my memory. Tomorrow, I'm leaving her for good. I can finally breathe. I'm finally free. He wanted freedom. He had planned for it, packed for it, and was driving toward it when his world went black. He had planned for it. Who was I to keep him caged in a life he didn't choose, bound by a love he no longer felt? And who was I, if I stayed? A liar? A coward, so terrified of being alone that I would build a life on a foundation of deceit? The woman in his diary, the needy, suffocating wife. Was I becoming her by clinging to him now? I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the window. I looked as haunted as I felt. I couldn't do it. I couldn't spend the rest of my life waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for a stray memory to surface and shatter everything. I couldn't live with the guilt of his loving gazes, knowing they were unearned. I looked at Ben, sleeping in our bed, his face relaxed and innocent. He looked so much like the man I first married, the man who deserved honesty, even if the truth was ugly. This new Ben, the one who worried about being a burden, the one who looked at me with such trust and affection, he deserved to know who he was, all of him. The man who was capable of great love, and the man who was capable of great betrayal. He deserved the chance to choose his own future, not one that was forced upon him by a brain injury. A quiet resolve settled over me. It wasn't about him, or Lena, or even our broken marriage anymore. It was about me. I deserved to be free, too. Free from the secret, free from the performance, free from a love that was built on a lie. With steady hands, I walked back into our bedroom. I didn't wake him. Instead, I took the journal and placed it gently on his nightstand, right next to his glass of water, and the watch he always took off before bed. I opened it to the last page, the final entry facing up. His own handwriting, a silent testament to the life he'd forgotten. I didn't know what would happen in the morning. He might wake up and the memories might come flooding back. He might read the words and hate me for showing him. He might not even believe it was real. He might walk out the door and never look back. But whatever happened, it would be the truth. And after years of living in the shadows of unspoken things, I was finally ready to stand in the light, no matter how much it burned.